books here, and if any of you want to go into the biblical matters more deeply, we have a very good book called Christians at the Border, and then another one called Welcoming the Stranger, and one of the authors of that book is here, Jenny Wong, and so she probably could sign it for you if you'd like, and we'll give you a special symposium discount. The decision to emigrate is rarely an easy one. I know I've lived and worked in 7 different countries. Whatever its faults, our native country is familiar, at least. We speak the language, we know what's expected of us, and we know what to expect. And so even when there are serious problems, the default option is to stay put. So even among populations that are affected by war, poverty, disaster, the majority usually do not migrate. By its very nature, the opportunity for migration attracts the most adventurous and enterprising members of society. Those who pull up their stakes and bet the bank on life in a foreign country show an uncommon courage and initiative. They're qualities which often make them extraordinarily successful in their adopted homelands. Immigrants to America are drawn by the promise of greater freedom and opportunity. They're sustained through the difficulties of culture shock, through an intangible asset, hope. Whatever the difficulties, they are confident that their future, and especially their children's future, is bright. However, if immigrants are generally energized by hope, their presence in relatively large numbers frequently evokes concern and even fear among some Americans. There's a surprisingly common assumption that the United States has a fixed number of jobs that are there to be, quote-unquote, taken, either by natives or by immigrants. In this view, closing our doors to future immigrants and removing some of those who are already here would open up new job opportunities and raise wages for native-born Americans. Such static, zero-sum thinking is profoundly at odds with reality, however. Throughout our nation's history, immigrants and immigration has been closely correlated with economic growth. From a Christian perspective, we know that people are assets, not liabilities. Every human being possesses unique abilities and gifts from God that are meant to bless the entire community. These innate qualities are not dependent on wealth or privilege. Except for those forcibly brought here through the tragedy of slave trading, most immigrants usually arrived with little more than their human capital and a hopeful vision. They created opportunities as they came, growing our economy with their strength, wits, and entrepreneurial energy. Michael Brin was born in Russia, studied at Moscow State University where he met his wife, Eugenia. Michael wanted to study physics, but as a Jewish person, he was prevented from doing so, so he chose mathematics. Eugenia also faced discrimination in her career path. In 1977, Michael met some American scholars while he was visiting a conference in Warsaw. He was captivated by the sense of intellectual freedom that they enjoyed. He wanted to emigrate. Eugenia hesitated because she knew it would be a wrenching transition, but she finally agreed mainly because she knew it would be a wonderful opportunity for their 6-year-old son, Sergei, to grow up in freedom. So in 1979, Michael and Eugenia applied for an exit visa, which in those days he couldn't even get out of the Soviet Union without one, and then applied to come to the United States as a refugee. They were accepted. Finally arrived here. Michael became a mathematics professor at the University of Maryland, and Eugenia went to work as a research scientist at the Goddard Space Flight Center. Now, did Michael and Eugenia take jobs that might otherwise have been filled by Americans? Perhaps. Although given the chronic shortage of qualified American mathematicians and scientists, it's possible that those positions would have gone unfilled. Or they might have been filled by less qualified applicants. The students at the University of Maryland and our nation's space program are the beneficiaries of the U.S. decision to admit Michael, Eugenia, and Sergei. But there's more. Michael and Eugenia's son, Sergei, quickly adjusted to life in America, graduated from Eleanor Roosevelt High School right here in Greenbelt, went on to the University of Maryland, studied computer science and math, graduated with honors, went to Stanford, and while he was at Stanford, as now it's probably well known, he and a friend rented a garage in Menlo Park and founded a new company, Google. now employs nearly 20,000 people and ranks number 4 on Fortune's list of the 100 top companies to work for. Now, had Sergey and his family stayed in Russia, perhaps Google would now be based in Moscow instead of in the Silicon Valley. Or more likely, it wouldn't exist at all, and those 20,000 workers would be competing for jobs somewhere else. In the modern American economy, which competes in an increasingly interconnected global economy, labor and capital are highly mobile and often interchangeable. A decade ago, Blockbuster was dominant in the video entertainment market. 2 weeks ago, they filed for bankruptcy, overtaken by Netflix and Redbox, utilizing new technologies to better serve their customers. And I could give other examples, but I'm going to skip over because of time. We'll skip some other stories as well. 1 in 7 persons in the American workforce was born abroad. This includes naturalized citizens, legal permanent residents, temporary workers, and those with no work authorization. Now, contrary to the popular stereotypes that fill a wide variety of occupations, business executives, busboys, Nobel Prize winners, nurses and nannies, doctors, drywall installers. Our ability to attract and retain the best and the brightest, as well as those willing to perform tasks for which most Americans are overqualified and reluctant to perform, provides much of the competitive advantage that we enjoy in today's global economy. Most European countries face impending labor shortages due to their low birth rate and aging populations. The U.S. faces similar challenges, but to a less extent because of our continuing immigration and higher birth rate among recent immigrants. But what about wages? Do immigrants suppress pay rates for native-born Americans? Recent research suggests not. In fact, the presence of immigrants drives a modest overall increase of perhaps 0.5% in the relative wages of non-immigrants. Ironically, the only workers that appear to be temporarily disadvantaged by the arrival of new immigrants are other immigrants, those whose wages may be depressed by 4 or 5%. The most likely explanation for this is that immigrants and native-born Americans play complementary roles in the U.S. economy rather than directly competing for the same jobs. In fact, the presence of immigrants increases the demand for goods and services which Americans provide, while providing and promoting retention of jobs which might otherwise be outsourced abroad. In 2007, President Bush commissioned a study by the White House Council on Economic Advisors on the economic impact of immigration, which concluded 3 things. 1, on average, U.S. natives benefit from immigration. Immigrants tend to complement, not substitute for natives, raising natives' productivity and income. 2, careful studies of the long-run fiscal effects of immigration conclude that it is likely to have a modest positive influence. And 3, skilled immigrants are likely to be especially beneficial to natives. In addition to the contributions to innovation, they have a significant positive fiscal impact. There's various estimates of the overall net contribution of immigrants. I won't go into that because of time. But in general, let me just say that it's widely considered that immigrants contribute a modest amount to the overall growth of our economy and our employment. I have some other things was going to say about church. Perhaps I'll get to that in the discussion. I just want to say in closing that the failure of both Republican and Democratic administrations and Congress to enact meaningful immigration reform is deeply disappointing. Government authorities appear to have ignored the church's exemplary treatment of immigrants, as the NAE mentions in our statement, and calls for reform, opting instead for political positioning and partisan blaming. Or perhaps is our treatment of immigrants less than exemplary? Perhaps we need to more clearly and consistently model the justice and mercy that we seek from our government. We can also do more to help our members, particularly those who do not have regular contact with immigrants, to understand both the spiritual and the economic benefits which come from welcoming our immigrant neighbors.